All right, good morning. We are going to go over the Friendship Safe Church policy today, and we just wanted to walk through this because the vision behind it is that we want to provide a safe and secure environment, which is vital to a healthy and functioning church. So Friendship Christian Reformed Church recognizes the various forms of abuse and neglect that can occur within church families, and with the implementation of this policy, we're trying to reduce the potential for abuse and outline procedures that would be followed in the case that abuse is alleged or suspected. We're also trying to protect the volunteers and employees from false accusations because we don't want to go through something that's unnecessary. So we put these steps in place to try and make it safe for everybody. So we're not going to cover the whole policy today, but we do have that accessible if you need it at any time. We're just going to try and pick some of the highlights and make sure that you feel comfortable with the understanding. The previous training that was done talked about a number of the reasons that we went through this training, signs of abuse that you can look for, signs of neglect that you can look for. So we're not going to cover those this time, but we're just going to go through those steps that we're expecting right now. This policy was just reviewed this summer, and there were some updates made, so that's why we want to make sure that we get those in your hands. And again, the vision for our church is that we want outreach and evangelism programs which involve children as well as adults. So members of our church should be engaged in being and making disciples. And so whether these are inside or outside of our church membership, we want the opportunity to speak truth into their lives. But we want to do it in a safe way where people don't feel intimidated by things that are happening. And so we put a couple of things in place, especially if you're working across different faiths or different cultures, in a situation where a child might make a direct inquiry. Because we believe that Christian training of children of non-Christian parents is not exploitative or unethical, we just want to make sure that we have the permission of the parents to do something like that. We don't want to be training a child in a way that they would feel uncomfortable with, because we respect the value of the family and the importance that is into their life. So we do want to make sure that we're not undermining any parental connection in that case. So general principles of conduct for staff and volunteers. So this will include all our staff and volunteers that are working in our nursery program, our Coffee Break Kids program, our Sunday school programs, our Ground Zero programs, our GEMS or Cadets programs, our One Way or our Fish mentorship programs. So this will apply to anybody working with kids under 18, basically. In order to be a staff or volunteer, you are required to complete the initial volunteer application form, which can be found on our Breeze documents as our staff volunteer profile and release. So this will go through so that we can collect enough information to follow up with a background check, which will be repeated every 3 years. We're also going to go over the Code of Ethics, which I will also cover, but you will want to sign that in addition to filling out the volunteer application so that we can make sure you understand those expectations on you as a volunteer and representative of Friendship. So that Code of Conduct will be covered every 2 years as well if you continue as a volunteer in ministry. We do want to note that we don't want to exclude anybody from our programming on the basis of any of those factors: income, race, religion, ethnicity, language, or disability. And parents or guardians will be required to give permission for us to participate with their children. At the same time, our program will be explicit about the evangelical elements in the program so that parents are clear that we'll be talking about statements and materials covering the gospel message. So after you go through the volunteer process, we just want to cover what are some specific prevention guidelines, so actions and behaviors that you will have in your interactions with the kids. So appropriate interactions would include things, and this list is not exhaustive, but it would include things like encouraging the children to learn and grow in faith, respecting each child's learning style as they respond to the information that you give them, treating each child in your care equally and giving equal opportunities for responsibilities, respecting each individual child, maintaining an orderly classroom without controlling it, so leading by cooperation for the benefit of all, protecting each child from shame or humiliation from either adults or other children in the program. If you find that a hug seems appropriate for your situation, be sure to give a brief side-by-side hug at the child's level. You'll want to avoid kisses, massages, bear hugs, or any contact with private body parts. Unless the child objects to touch, a pat on a shoulder or a forearm or a light squeeze of the hand is acceptable. Any physical contact with the child should be done with doors open and or in front of others. Remember that words of praise and encouragement are a good way to communicate God's love and support and your respect for that child. And in general, you want to try and follow the rule of 3, which states that at least 3 individuals, with one of them being an adult, must be present at every function and in each classroom, vehicle, or other enclosed area during any activity involving children or youth. The exception would be the restroom policy as described in the appropriate areas for where you're volunteering. So again, we do want to encourage physical touch. We know that can be a love language for many children. We just want to make sure that the touches that are used are appropriate and don't make anyone feel uncomfortable. If you find yourself in a situation where there needs to be some discipline, there are again some guidelines we've set out. The list is not exhaustive again, but here's some guidelines for you. Make sure that you have realistic expectations that reflect the child's age and comprehension, so you're not holding them to a standard that they can't meet. You do want to try and use the least amount of intervention necessary. You do want to try and make direct eye contact with the child who is misbehaving, so they know you're directing it towards them. If you can use a distraction to take them away from the cause of the problem, perhaps by making him or her a special helper and giving them a job to do with you in that area. If you need to change a seating assignment or place yourself between the misbehaving children, sometimes that can be enough distraction. If you're able to remove the child from others and calmly explain what the expected behavior is that they might be missing, maybe they didn't understand what those expectations were. If a timeout is needed, the general rule is 1 minute of timeout for each year of the child's age, and then follow up with the reason and the reinsurance when they're ready to have that interaction back with you. If you can catch the child in good behavior, we want you to encourage them in that. If you find that they're having good behavior, be sure to send home notes to the parents to inform them that they had a good day and some things that were going well. If the child is being disrespectful or disruptive, you can try to take the child aside and label the behavior itself and explain how that behavior is then affecting the rest of the class. If you can speak in love, try and do so there's not a cause for humiliation or harming that young ego. And if you're speaking directly to the child does not cause that behavior to stop, then you can have the assistant bring the child to their parent or ministry leader, and you can do further intervention at that point. If the child's behavior warrants more than a minor correction or is a continual ongoing problem, then the parent should be involved. So you'll want to write down the misbehavior and the steps that you've already taken. You want to give this with a verbal report to the ministry leader of your area. And you want to form an agreement with the parents and the ministry leader so that you can engage the parents on how to work with the child on appropriate group behavior. And be sure the discipline that you come up with is something that you don't mind having repeated. So if you've determined that it's going to be most effective for that child, know that it probably is going to happen more than one occasion. So you're going to have to do it for that child and in front of others as well. So make sure that that's appropriate and followed. If you have questions about specific instances where you've had disruption in your classroom, feel free to speak with your ministry leader and get more information about what some appropriate ways to interrupt or distract those behaviors are. We also can reach out to the denomination and get some more training through All Belong about specific ways that we might be able to integrate others into the classroom if you're having a specific instance. And last, we want to cover what some inappropriate interactions would be. So we expect that these should never happen from you as volunteer leaders. There shouldn't be any physical discipline happening, and there shouldn't be any instances of where you need to remain in control but you lose control of yourself. So you don't want to cause any pain, injury, or humiliation. There shouldn't be any verbal or emotional manipulation, so you're not going to give the child the silent treatment, you're not going to withhold bathroom privileges, cause shame or embarrassment. Any of these things would single them out and start to make them question their self and their identity. There should be no sexual manipulation, no sexualized hugs, strokes, or kisses for good behavior. There should never be an adult blaming a child to justify the adult's inappropriate behavior. If you lost control, you need to own it and take responsibility for that, and then deal with the child's behavior issue separately. If a child is singled out for excessive discipline, especially on an ongoing behavior, that can be inappropriate. If a child is told or threatened not to cry or not to tell anybody else, that would never be acceptable. So any of those forms of relating to youth are abusive, and they're not acceptable under any circumstances. They can get blown way out of proportion, and they can have long-lasting implications for you as the adult and for the child. So remember, in a tough situation, if you need to step back, evaluate, be smart, just don't lose control of yourself. Feel free to ask for help if that's something that you need. There should be another adult, or there should be a ministry leader that you can get more information from if you need it. All right, so we are going to go through some expectations for youth programs to make sure that parents are informed of things that are happening through events and or transportation. So anytime there's a scheduled event in that program, parents should be notified of any event that's being held other than the normal meeting area. And that would include the date, the time, what transportation arrangements are being made, and the cell phone leader of the event, so that they can get a hold of and get information about their child should it be needed at some point. There will need to be permission slips for any off-church grounds event that are signed by the parent and guardian, and will be collected from the youth before that youth is allowed to participate. Usually with cadets and GEMS, there should be one annual permission slip that should be considered valid for the entirety of that ministry year that you're going to be going through. Ordinarily, the expectation is there will be at least 2 unrelated adults present at group activities or in a vehicle. If this is not possible, then the parents will be notified. The exception would be if there's one adult and multiple kids involved. You would still be covered under that rule of 3, and so you would have other witnesses to give their perspective should something be stated. And then it's usually recommended that the ratio of adult leaders to youth for regular youth meetings would be 1 adult to 8 students. So these could be modified if needed for off-site events, or in the case that there is, unexpected circumstances. During the scheduled events, the youth leaders must know where their youth are. That would be an expectation. If a young person leaves the event without permission, the parent should be called immediately. And if for any reason international travel is part of the event, there will need to be additional permission slips signed for the ministry leaders and volunteers to transport that youth across international lines. And that is for protection of the adults mainly, as well as the children. If there's any reason to have one-on-one meetings with a leader and youth in the program, you should make sure that any meetings are held in a public place, so there would be other witnesses around you. Youth leaders should avoid sitting and talking in stationary vehicles with the youth, so if you're in that close proximity in the vehicle. If it's possible, FCRC encourages all one-on-one interactions between the youth and adults to be of the same gender. So female leaders with female students, male leaders with male students. If the meeting is going to be at the youth's home, the leader must ensure that there's a parent or adult home that knows about the visit. You can inform the parent through text, email, or a phone call, but the parent needs to be present if you're in the student's home. Any ministry leader will be informed of scheduled meetings in advance to the parents. And the parents and guardians must be notified of one-on-one and small group meetings that are not scheduled on the church calendar. So if you're having an extra meeting outside of the typical times that your program would be meeting, make sure that the parents are aware of that through a text or a phone call or an email, so you have a response back saying that they understand and acknowledge it. For transportation policy, so if you're going to be going away from where the kids have been dropped off, you want to make sure that any driver that's transporting minors on behalf of the church have to be 21 years or older, and they should have a valid driver's license. They should comply with the laws and limitations that apply to their operator's license. And you want to make sure that they have gone through the vehicle background screening check. So that is available at the office should it be needed for any volunteers in your program. Again, you want to make sure that, if possible, you're following the rule of 3 in the vehicle. So there should be at minimum 1 adult and 2 children present. And typically you would want the children to be in the back seats if possible. The exception would be if you're driving the church bus, where 1 adult would be driving, a second adult would be present on the bus, not in the front seat if the kids are being transported. Make sure that the kids are using their seatbelts, and make sure that the number of passengers is not exceeding the number of seatbelts available in the vehicle. Remember that transportation to and from the meetings is not part of the church or youth group activities. So parents or guardians are responsible for providing this transportation. So if a volunteer person transports a minor at the parent's request, this should be recognized as informal contact and not a part of the church program. So you might end up in that 1 adult and 1 child situation, which is not ideal. And so you want to make sure that the parents are clear that that expectation is different than during the church programming. If you have any overnight events for your program, you want to make sure that the parents have completed the registration and emergency information form, which should come at the beginning of the year, so that we have a way to contact the parents in case of an emergency. Again, remember that at least 2 leaders must be present at all times at overnight events, and there will be separate areas for males and females provided at any overnight event. At least 1 adult, and preferably 2 adults, would be designated to the areas and be present during the entire overnight event. And male and female adults must be present if there's any co-ed activities going on. Ordinarily, all retreats or overnight events require a set of written guidelines for expectations regarding participation. So that's the Youth Code of Conduct policy, which is also available should you need to go through that. So if for some reason during your time a child discloses to you abuse or neglect that's happening to them, what would be a good way for you to respond? The first would be make sure that you have a time that you can privately listen to them in a public place. So perhaps a coffee house or some place where there would be others present, but they won't be around other people in the programming involved. Make sure that you listen carefully to what's said and give them a supportive, non-judgmental response back. So disclosing abuse can be a very scary thing, and they need to know that they're feeling supported in that situation. Try not to feel or appear frightened or disgusted by the disclosure things that are being said, since this might cause the person to think that you're upset with them, and then they would stop talking. If you can ask leading questions like, can you tell me more? Or is there anything more you need to add to that? You might get more information out of them, versus if you just ask those yes or no questions or try to convince them that their story didn't happen or wasn't true the way that they reported it. You want them to feel free to express those events in the way that they remember them and they happened, if at all possible. Remember that it's not your job to assess the truthfulness of this person's disclosure. That would be for the professionals to decide. But just assure the person that you believe them and that you care about them, and you're going to do what you can to make it right. Tell the person that whatever happened was not their fault, and reassure them that they don't deserve to be hurt by anyone. Don't tell or suggest to the person that they have been abused. You don't want to throw that out until there might be more information about the situation. But reassure them that they did the right thing by telling an appropriate adult what was going on. Don't promise to not tell anyone else. Tell the person that help is going to be needed, so you can make sure that type of behavior doesn't happen again. If they're asking you not to disclose it to anybody else, that's a promise that you can't make. But because they talk to a trusted adult, you can be sure and give them information to try and put them in a safer spot. You don't need to talk to them directly about any police involvement or medical examinations. Instead, just share that you're going to have to tell the appropriate people and that they may have to talk to somebody else again later. So don't ask the person to show you any bruises that might be beneath clothing. Only observe any bruises that are accessible. And if comfortable, speak to the person and offer support in the following weeks and months. If you become aware of a suspected case of abuse or neglect, whether it's from a child about a church staff member, a volunteer, a teacher, a leader, whether it's in the church facility or anywhere else, it should be taken seriously and handled confidentially. So if you need to report suspected child abuse, that can be made to any person who by any person who has reasonable cause to suspect the abuse or neglect. If you are a mandated reporter, you're required to report those things to certain professionals. As a volunteer in the program, you are not a mandated reporter, but if you think something's happening, it would be beneficial to get that out there so it could be investigated. We would recommend following these steps. So staff members who are ministers are mandated reporters. Any volunteer or other staff member, including custodial staff, and all volunteer teachers and leaders who have reasonable cause to suspect child abuse or neglect. So if you're a person of a leadership position and you feel like the information that has been brought to you does require disclosure, we define anybody who's in that leadership role, whether staff or volunteer, as somebody who should report that behavior. Specifically, staff are mandated reporters. The child abuse reporting process would be first to contact the ministry leader or the administrator, myself, so that we can contact the SafeChurch team and let them know that there's an incident that we need to be addressing. If there's an emergency situation and you can't reach somebody like that, then you're going to proceed directly to the Child Protection Hotline. That number is 1-800-4CHILD, CHILD, which can give advice and guidance and may be helpful before reporting to the statewide number. Once you get that follow-up, you'll want to call the State of Michigan Department of Human Services, DHS, and CPS, and their phone number is 855-444-3911. You're going to make a verbal report there because somebody should be there to take your call immediately. And then you will have to follow up with a written report after that. So they should give you the form to fill out the written report. And this can be either completed online or it can be faxed to CPS. The person that you speak with can give you further information about that reporting as well. And then, if possible, we'd hope that you would include incident report form to the church, and you can give that reported form to myself as the administrator, so that we can follow up if there's any person in our programming that needs to be addressed about that. Remember that it's the responsibility of the police to notify the alleged offender that there's allegations against him or her. It's not your responsibility as the reporter. And so remember that it's probably best if you don't initiate that confrontation. For reasons of confidentiality, we'll appoint a liaison between legal authorities and CPS and the church staff council to make sure that there's not that heightened emotional conversations going back and forth. Anybody who's involved must document any involvement that they had in the reporting process and any follow-up actions that they've taken. So this is going to be kept in a locked file in the church office, and the only access would go to the ministry leader of the program and myself as the administrator. I also wanted to let everyone know that we do have a policy on if there is a sexual offender who does want to attend our church. So again, there's more information on that, but we do have that listed in our policy to address. We also do cover if there is an unsubstantiated sexual offender. So if there's an accusation but there's nothing to follow up on it, we have a policy on how to proceed with that individual as well. All right, the last thing that I wanted to do as well was just go over the code of conduct. So you as a ministry leader are representing Friendship Church. So we just want to make sure that you're understanding and agreeing to these guidelines as that representation. So they would be as followed. I understand that as a child or youth program volunteer, I'm representative of Friendship Church and the Kingdom of God. I agree to conduct myself in a manner that models for others an active and growing Christian faith. I understand that students I will serve will look to me for direction and guidance that supports their growing faith in Jesus Christ. Believing that God is calling me to serve with children or youth at Friendship Christian Reformed Church, my first priority is supervising or volunteering with children or youth will be to seek their spiritual, psychological, and social welfare. I will portray a positive role model for minors by maintaining an attitude of respect, loyalty, patience, courtesy, and maturity. I will respect each child or youth's cultural, religious, or ethnic backgrounds. I will answer a child or youth's questions openly and honestly. I will not intentionally harm or betray a child or a youth's trust. I will not use alcohol, illegal drugs, or tobacco products in the presence of minors involved in friendship programs. I'll dress in a manner that's respectful of the ministry and the kingdom of God. All clothing should be modest, appropriate, and set a positive example as determined by the ministry leaders. I promise not to use profanity in the presence of minors. I will contact the appropriate person in a timely manner if I'm unable to fulfill my assigned or scheduled responsibilities. I will give the parents of the child or the youth full information about the program I am supervising and volunteering in. If you wish to speak to a child or youth alone, it will be within the sight and sound of one or more other adults. And I will work with the children or youth to set guidelines for acceptable behavior within the group. I will expect children or youth to act based on those guidelines, and if necessary, I will seek help from the parents and others to assist me in responding to the child. I will pray for the children or youth regularly to assure them that I care about them. And I will follow the policies and procedures in our SafeChurch policy. If I have reasonable cause to suspect child abuse or neglect, I will report my suspicions to the lead pastor within 24 hours of the incident. I understand that learning the principles in the Bible and growing more like Jesus is important to my spiritual, emotional, and relational growth as a Christian. So I understand the best way to achieve this growth is through regular attendance of church and personal Bible study. I understand that any violation of this code could be grounds for removal as a volunteer with minors, and that this policy is subject to change at any time. So when you're agreeing to this code of ethics, it will be in place for 2 years, and then we will contact you if it needs to be renewed. But we just ask that you maintain these behaviors to show your respect and hopefully create it in those children as well. We want to have a fun and exciting ministry experience for those youth, so we encourage you to laugh and enjoy time with them, but just we want to remember how to be respectful and to maintain that teaching them those respectful behaviors as well. If you have any questions about the policy, feel free to contact your ministry leader. If that can't be cleared up, you can contact myself at the office as well. And if you have any questions about the policy itself or need to see more of that information, please feel free to get a hold of me at the office by email or phone. If you need access to the church for your ministry program through door access, I am also the person that you'll want to contact, and make sure that you have that key fob set up so that you can get into the doors. And if you have any other questions, I'm happy to answer them at any time. Thank you guys so much.